Right, ready to dive in. Today's topic might throw you for a loop. We're talking about Cold War, but not the one you learned about in history class.
Right.
This one's brewing in our schools.
Yeah.
And it's all about this wall, this metaphorical wall that's built up between general education and special education.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is this impacts all students, not just the ones with IEPs.
It really does. And what's wild is this is not like a new thing. I mean, this wall, it's been standing for like, what, almost 50 years.
Yeah.
Ever since the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it was passed back in 1975. So we're talking generations of students who have gone through this system.
In 50 years. Honestly, I had no idea. Makes you wonder how many kids fell through the cracks because of this.
Yeah.
So if this wall has been up for so long, what's keeping it standing?
Well, I mean, it's not just one thing, right? Dr. Howie Knoff, and he's an expert in educational solutions, he identifies 5 major barriers that are basically propping up this wall. And those are organizational issues, problems with supervision, accountability, roadblocks to professional development and relationships. Then we've got challenges with instructional skills and collaboration. And finally, issues surrounding student persistence and success.
5 major barriers. That's a lot. It sounds pretty systemic.
Yeah.
Not just like a couple of issues here and there.
Oh, absolutely. It's like woven into the fabric of the system, But don't worry, we're gonna break it all down like piece by piece.
Okay, good.
And today we'll tackle those organizational barriers, like really get into the nitty-gritty of how these issues play out, in the real world.
Okay, good. Because just hearing organizational barriers kind of makes my eyes glaze over a little bit. Like, what does that actually look like in a school?
Yeah, well, so imagine a school principal.
Okay.
And they're trying to create a truly inclusive environment, but they have zero say in how special education resources are allocated at the district level. So their hands are tied, and they're left scrambling to meet the needs of all their students without the necessary support.
So it's like they're trying to build a house without the right blueprints or materials.
Exactly.
And ultimately, who suffers? The students.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical resources either, right? It's about communication, or rather, the lack of it. Think about how often decisions are made at that district level without any input from the people who are actually, on the ground. The teachers, the special ed staff, even the parents.
Right, like they're practically speaking different languages.
Totally.
No wonder there's such a disconnect. There was this quote from Dr. Knopf that really stuck with me. He said, "The real expense is the human capital and loss in a system not serving its students and staff well."
It's so true. You can pour all this money into fancy programs and initiatives, but if the underlying organizational structure is messed up, it's like you're trying to fill a leaky bucket. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good analogy. Okay, so we've identified a problem. Lack of communication and collaboration between district leaders and school staff. But what are the solutions?
Well, the solution might seem kind of surprisingly simple. Actually talk to each other.
Okay.
Seriously, regular meetings between superintendents, curriculum leaders, and special ed directors. This could be transformative. And the source also really emphasizes special ed directors.
Yeah.
They need a seat at the superintendent's table. They need to be part of those high-level decisions.
Makes you wonder why something so straightforward isn't already happening everywhere. I mean, wouldn't everyone benefit from that? Better communication.
You'd think, right? But a lot of times there's these deeply ingrained power structures, and there's budgetary constraints, obviously, and frankly, I think there's just a lack of understanding about the really vital role that special ed plays in the success of all students.
It's frustrating, but at least there are solutions. Okay, so communication is key, but it's only one piece of the puzzle,
right?
What about those supervision and accountability barriers?
Yes. So this is where it gets really interesting because we're talking about leadership, the role of leadership in fostering that inclusive environment. And often, the problem isn't malicious intent. It's honestly a lack of understanding.
You mean like principals and administrators not knowing enough about special education law and best practices?
Exactly. They might have, the best intentions in the world,
Right.
but they just don't have the knowledge and the tools to actually implement these, complex laws like
Okay.
IDEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Section 504.
So it's not enough to just say we support inclusion.
Right.
You have to actually know how to make it happen
Yeah.
in a practical way, in a legal way,
The meaningful way.
in a meaningful way.
Yeah. And that's where the accountability piece comes in.
Okay.
Principals, they need to be actively involved in monitoring and supporting their school's multi-tiered system of supports, or, MTSS. They need to attend those meetings, provide feedback to the teachers,
Right.
even, use professional development plans to address any gaps in implementation.
So it's about active leadership, not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk. And speaking of walking, something in the source really caught my eye. It said that schools should let service needs drive the schedule, not the other way around.
Right.
That seems almost counterintuitive to how most schools operate.
It might, yeah, but think about it this way, right? You have a student who needs, let's say, speech therapy,
Right.
but the only available slot for that is during their math class, which they're already struggling in. That's not setting anybody up for success.
Right. It's almost setting them up for failure.
Exactly.
So by prioritizing the student's needs first and building the schedule around that,
Yeah.
you create a much more flexible and responsive environment
For everybody.
for everybody.
Yeah, and it's not just students with IEPs that benefit from that, right? I mean, a more flexible schedule can accommodate other things, tutoring sessions, enrichment activities,
Right.
even just like downtime
Yeah.
for students who are just, feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. It's like a ripple effect
Yeah.
from positive change impacting the whole school environment. But we can't forget about the teachers in all of this. I mean, they're the ones in the trenches every day.
They are.
How do those professional development and relationship barriers impact their ability to actually support all these different learners?
Yeah, well, this is where we start to kind of move beyond like the logistics, right?
Yeah.
And get into more like the mindset, like the culture. We need professional development
Okay.
that equips all teachers, not just, the special ed teachers, but all teachers
Right.
with the skills to actually support diverse learners.
So things like, differentiation, accommodations, assistive technology, like it's about giving all teachers those tools
All the tools.
they need to create a truly inclusive classroom.
Yes, and it goes beyond just the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It's about building relationships. It's about fostering open communication
Okay.
between general ed and special ed teachers.
Hmm.
Imagine if there was like dedicated time for them to just collaborate, problem solve together, brainstorm, share their expertise.
So instead of it being like special ed over there and general ed over here, it's a unified team
Yes.
working together to support every student.
That's the goal, yeah. And co-teaching plays a big role in this, but it has to be done right. You know what I mean?
Right.
It can't just be the general ed teacher only focusing on the general ed kids and the special ed teacher handling all the IEPs.
Right, because then you're just reinforcing that divide, right?
Totally, yeah.
Defeats the whole purpose. I can already see how much goes into making inclusion actually work.
It's complex,
Yeah.
but the payoff is huge.
Yeah.
When we break down these barriers, we create a learning environment where, truly everyone can thrive. And that's what we'll continue exploring in the next segment, where we delve into those instructional skills and collaboration barriers. Stay with us.
Can't wait. Welcome back. We're really getting into it now,
Yeah.
exploring this whole Cold War between general and special ed. And before we jump back into those barriers,
Yeah.
I think it's important to kind of circle back to something you mentioned earlier, those crucial contexts that add like another layer of complexity to all of this.
Absolutely. It's so easy to just think about special ed as like this one big category, but the reality is so much more, nuanced than that. We're talking about 13 different disability categories,
Right.
each with its own like unique characteristics and needs and supports.
Okay, so let's break down those categories a little bit. What are some of the most common ones we see in schools today? And how does understanding those different needs like impact how we approach inclusion?
Yeah, well, so consider this, right? A whopping 70% of students with disabilities fall into just 3 categories:
Wow.
specific learning disabilities, speech or language impairments, and other health impairments. So that means like the vast majority of these kids, they're not defined by some, overarching special needs label. It's specific challenges that
Right.
with the right support, might not even require a separate classroom setting at all.
That's a huge percentage. It really challenges that whole idea that special ed students are somehow fundamentally different from their general ed peers.
Right.
They just learn differently, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that brings us to another crucial context. The fact that most students with disabilities are already spending most of their time in general ed classrooms anyway, like the source says it's often like 80% or more.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The system is like already built for inclusion in a way, but then we have all these barriers that we're talking about
Totally.
that are preventing it from actually being successful.
It is. It's a classic case of like the right intentions,
Right.
but the wrong execution, you know? We've got general ed teachers who are largely responsible for educating students with IEPs, but they often don't have the training, the resources, the support to actually do it effectively.
It's like having all the ingredients for an amazing meal, but no recipe.
Yeah, totally.
You need that guidance, that framework to make it all come together.
And that's where our third context comes in, that problem-solving approach to service delivery. It's about shifting from a reactive model, where we wait for students to fail before we do anything, to a proactive one, where we identify struggles early on and provide targeted support in the general ed classroom.
So instead of putting out fires, you're preventing them from starting in the first place.
Exactly.
Which makes so much sense, especially when we're talking about how many students are already, integrated into those general education settings.
Exactly, yeah. It's about creating a system that catches those students before they fall through the cracks. And this requires a team effort, Yeah. General ed and special ed teachers working together alongside specialists like, school psychologists and counselors.
So true collaboration is really the key here. Not just teachers working, in their separate silos, but a unified team with a shared understanding of each student's needs and how to best support them.
It's about recognizing that every student, regardless of their challenges, has the potential to succeed.
Right.
And it's about equipping teachers with the tools and resources to actually unlock that potential.
Okay, I love that.
Right.
So we've kind of laid out these important contexts.
Yeah.
The diversity of all these disability categories.
Yeah.
The reality that most students with IEPs are already in gen ed classrooms.
Right.
And this crucial problem-solving approach.
Right.
How do those contexts kind of tie back to the specific barriers that we're unpacking?
Well, let's take instructional skill and collaboration, for example.
Okay.
One of the biggest obstacles here is just a lack of expertise in evidence-based instructional strategies, particularly among general education teachers.
So they might not have had adequate training in things like differentiation, accommodations, modifications, or even how to use assistive technology effectively.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like expecting them to build a house without giving them the right tools.
It is, yeah.
Or the knowledge of how to use those tools.
Right. And the source emphasizes that, general education teachers need access to high quality professional development that actually equips them with those specific strategies that they need to support diverse learners.
Right.
And it can't just be like a one-time workshop, right? It needs to be ongoing and embedded in the school culture.
So it's about investing in our teachers, giving them the support they need to create truly inclusive classrooms. Mm-hmm. And it's about moving beyond this idea that supporting students with disabilities is only the responsibility of special ed teachers.
Right. It's a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
It's a collective effort. And co-teaching, when done well, can be a game changer here.
We touched on co-teaching earlier.
We did.
But let's dive a little deeper. What does effective co-teaching actually look like in practice?
So imagine, you have a general ed teacher and a special ed teacher.
Okay.
And they're planning lessons together. They're sharing their expertise. They're creating learning experiences that are engaging and accessible for all the students. They're not just dividing the class in half.
Right.
They're working as a true team.
That's a far cry from you handle this group and I'll handle this group dynamic that we see so often. It sounds like a much more, collaborative and supportive environment for everyone involved.
It is. And it's not just about sharing the classroom, right? The source actually recommends formalizing these partnerships by including general ed teachers in the whole IEP process.
Okay.
Imagine general education teachers being actively involved in, developing those individual plans, implementing them, and even monitoring them.
That would be huge. I mean, that would really solidify that sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah.
And kind of break down those silos that so often exist between general and special ed. But even with the best training and the most collaborative partnerships, There's still going to be challenges,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Kids don't always progress in a straight line,
Right.
and sometimes things just don't work out as planned.
Right. And that brings us to our fifth and final barrier, persistence and success.
Okay.
One of the biggest challenges here is just, accurately measuring student progress and celebrating success, even when it comes in like, small increments.
Especially when you're talking about students with disabilities, right? They might not be hitting those like traditional benchmarks or
Right.
performing well on standardized tests, but that doesn't mean they're not learning and growing.
Exactly. We need to kind of broaden our definition of success
Right.
and recognize that it might look different for every student and equip teachers with, the tools and strategies to track those individual growth moments.
So it's about celebrating those small victories.
Yes.
Those moments of progress that might go unnoticed
Absolutely.
in a more, traditional classroom setting.
It's about recognizing that learning is a journey, not a destination.
I love that.
And it's about supporting both the students and the teachers along the way, acknowledging their efforts
Yeah.
and celebrating those achievements, no matter how big or small.
It's about shifting that focus from what's wrong with you
Yeah.
to what are you capable of?
Yeah.
And I think that's a message that we all need to hear,
Yes.
not just in the context of education, but like in life.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's about recognizing the potential that exists in every single person and creating an environment where that potential can actually flourish.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Mm.
From those, 5 columns holding up this metaphorical wall
What?
to practical strategies for actually, chipping away at those barriers.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers,
No.
but it sounds like even small changes
Yeah.
can have a big impact.
Absolutely. Every step we take, every conversation we have, every effort we make to break down these barriers, it brings us closer to a more inclusive and equitable education system. And,
Right.
and that's a goal worth striving for.
I'm feeling like kind of a mix of frustration that this problem has persisted for so long,
Yeah.
but also hope that by, shining a light on these issues,
Yeah.
we can finally start to see some real lasting change.
I hope so too.
But we're not done yet. We've got one more segment to go where we're going to explore even more practical strategies for tearing down this wall. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this Cold War in education, this wall between general and special education. And honestly, it's been a lot. Yeah, but it's not enough to just like talk about the problems. We got to talk about solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the source material that we've been discussing really shines. I mean, it's packed with practical strategies. Like it's like a roadmap for change.
Okay, I love a good roadmap. So let's say, right, I'm a teacher listening to this, and I'm thinking, okay, I get it, inclusion, it's important, but like, where do I even start? What's like one tangible thing I can do tomorrow in my classroom to start, chipping away at this wall?
One really powerful strategy that stood out to me was involving students with disabilities in their own learning process.
Yeah.
The source really highlighted how often IEP meetings, they feel like they're happening to the student, not with them. Imagine how empowering it would be for a student to have a voice in their own goals, like their support strategies, even how their progress is measured.
That's such a huge shift in perspective. It's about recognizing their agency,
Mm-hmm.
their right to like be active participants in their own education.
Exactly.
And that's something any teacher can start doing right now.
Totally. It's about those small but meaningful changes that can really have like a ripple effect,
I'm also thinking about all the general education teachers out there who might be, listening to this and feeling a little overwhelmed. Like, I want to support these students, but I don't know where to start. What advice would you give them?
Reach out to the special ed teachers in your school. Like, seriously, schedule a coffee chat, observe their classrooms, ask questions. The source really emphasized that special ed teachers, they shouldn't be overloaded with direct service responsibilities. They should have dedicated time for collaboration and consultation, like acting as a resource for their general ed colleagues.
So it really is about building those relationships, like those communication channels that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So seeing each other as allies, like on the same team, not competitors in different camps.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just about helping the special ed kids. The strategies that benefit students with disabilities, they often benefit all learners,
Right.
Think about universal design for learning, for example. Creating lessons and environments that are accessible and engaging for a wide range of learners, that's a win-win for everyone.
It's about creating a better learning environment for all students, period.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
But let's be real, right? Like systemic change, it can be slow.
It can be, yeah.
How do we keep that momentum going when it feels like such an uphill battle?
That's a great point. One thing that really stood out to me in the source material was the emphasis on celebrating success, like for both students and teachers. It's so easy to get like bogged down in the challenges, but it's so crucial to acknowledge those wins, no matter how big or small.
You need those little like boosts to keep you going.
Right.
Those moments of like validation that remind you why you're doing this work in the first place.
Exactly. And it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, evaluating success in a way that is actually meaningful, right? It's not just about test scores. It's about capturing those individual growth moments, like those aha moments that might not show up on, a standardized assessment.
It's about shifting that focus from what students can't do to what they can do,
Yeah.
and celebrating those achievements. And I think that's a message that resonates far beyond the classroom too.
I agree. It's a philosophy we can all apply to our lives,
Yeah.
Focusing on our strengths, celebrating our progress, and supporting each other along the way.
Wow. We covered a lot of ground today. I started this deep dive feeling honestly pretty clueless about this whole Cold War happening in our schools.
Yeah.
But now I'm feeling, I don't know, kind of fired up. Like, okay, I see the problem, but I also see like a path forward.
That's the spirit. It's a complex issue, but awareness is the first step, right?
Yeah.
Once we understand the problem, then we can start, working toward those solutions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the one thing that you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation? Like what's that one action step they can take to be part of the solution?
I would encourage every listener to think about their own experiences in education. Did they encounter any of these barriers that we talked about? Did they see classmates struggling? What could have been done differently? Even just having those internal conversations, it can spark new ideas and inspire action.
Maybe talk to a teacher.
Mm.
Share this deep dive with a friend, or even just reflect on how you can be a more inclusive and supportive member of your community. Every little bit helps.
Absolutely. It's about taking those individual actions that collectively can create like a ripple effect of change.
It's about believing that a better future is possible, a future where all students have the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their needs. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Cold War of education. Remember, change, it starts with each of us.